I'm welcoming here today Ray Blake, who is a FinCrime subject matter expert at Risk Alert 247 and director for the Dark Money Files as well. So welcome, Ray, this afternoon. Thank you for joining me on our podcast with Transform Finance. How are you doing?
For having me. Yeah, very well indeed. Thank you.
Good. So if you don't mind, we'll dive straight in. Just wanted to kick off. So based obviously on all of the years that you have spent dissecting, I believe, AML systems.
Oh, you make me feel so old. But yeah, years and years.
I was picking off from your profile. You mentioned you're the AML guy, so I thought I'd start with that. But
no, fair enough.
What do you think is the biggest illusion that the industry still tells itself about financial crime controls, just based on your years of experience?
Okay, so the thing about this question, you did give me notice of it. There are so many things to choose from. There are so many lies that we tell ourselves, really, because it's convenient to. But the one I'm going to go with is one that I discussed with a professional colleague of mine, Peter Jones, who is an MLRO that people may know. And it's simply this, that the illusion that there is a piece of software that we can buy, that when we turn it on, will make all of our risks go away without any further effort on our part. And that software doesn't exist. And if it did exist, it wouldn't cover all of our exposures anyway, because the regulator don't hold software accountable. The regulators hold people accountable. So I think that's the one I'm going with. That's I think the biggest deception we try and perpetrate on ourselves.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's fair enough. And obviously, with your experience, you're with Risk Alert 247 and Dark Money Files is current, isn't it? I was correct in that, wasn't I?
Oh yeah,
current on focus at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, completely.
Okay, brilliant.
So I often recommend technology solutions to people, but that has to be against the background that this is not, make all the bad things go away magic button that you're going to press. It will help you do the job that you're charged with doing, but it won't mitigate every risk without any effort on your part. And the firms that Risk Alert 247 is engaging with to manage the system that we provide are very well aware of that, and
Yep.
The ones who are using the system, kind of dynamically and effectively, are getting a lot out of it.
Brilliant. Okay. And in terms of just moving on, we wanted to touch on the failure to prevent fraud and corporate liability. With the new failure to prevent fraud offence, which is now live,
yes.
Do you think that the firms out there truly understand the cultural shift this represents, or are we seeing just another documentation exercise? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think the failure to prevent fraud offence isn't what many people think it is. It only applies in quite a restrictive set of situations. It needs a large organisation. The fraud needs to have been committed or attempted by an employee or an agent of the firm for the benefit of the firm. And that doesn't describe most of the fraud that we live with on a daily basis, the so-called fraud tsunami, whereas wherein, it's a third party attacking an individual through the firm's facilities. Well, that's out of scope for this offence. It doesn't make any difference to it. Whereas, many of us waiting for the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act to come around and go through the stages in Parliament were hopeful that there would be a much wider failure to prevent fraud offence, which is more similar to the failure to prevent tax evasion that we've had since 2017 and the Criminal Finances Act. That didn't happen. But I mean, even the 2017 failure to prevent tax evasion offence, it took um, 8 years for the first prosecution to come about under that provision. So, I mean, it's fairly clear that new power is not going to have an enormous and transformative effect anytime soon.
Yep.
But, companies certainly should be treating it seriously, but it's an internally focused control rather than an outward one.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. And in terms of what we're measuring, in terms of are we actually measuring the wrong things? So we often measure SAR numbers, transaction monitoring alerts, regulatory fines, and so on. But are we measuring actual harm reduction? And what metrics would you redesign if you could there?
Well, we're measuring our inputs, aren't we? We're
Yeah.
measuring what we're doing. And by we, I mean we, the good guys, the firms, the compliance departments. We're measuring our activity, or we're measuring the regulators' fining record. Um, and I just wonder whether that is correlated in any way with the amount of crime that's going on, or harm that's resulting, or that we're saving. I mean, fines in particular are a really, really poor measure of effectiveness. If you take all of the fines that are charged by every regulator globally, anywhere in the world, and you add them all up, you convert them all into dollars or pounds or whatever. And you do that for a 3-year period, you'll find that the entire total could have been paid out of 1/4's profit from one global bank. If we think that is anything other than a cost of doing business, we're wrong. It's not dissuasive on by itself in any way.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. That makes sense. That makes sense, exactly. And then you've also spoken quite a bit, I believe, around the role of gatekeepers, the lawyers, accountants, trust service providers, and so on. Do you believe that the UK is finally getting serious about tackling professional enablers, or is enforcement still too cautious, erring on the side of caution? Do you have
Yeah.
any thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think it has been serious for quite a while. I mean, there is, notwithstanding that, a bit of a shake-up coming as we move to a single supervisor model, and the SRA's powers go over to the FCA. And I think, that's not universally popular, that move, to put it mildly. It is, however, politically irresistible in the court of public opinion. There is no good reason for not holding all of the market participants to the same standard and the same supervision, on the basis that it's it's a little bit like, how can I put this? It's a little bit like a dam. Any one brick in that dam is capable of breaking and letting water through. So why does it matter whether it's a brick over here or a brick over there? Why does it matter if it's a bank or a payments firm, or a legal firm or an accountancy? Any of them, if they don't meet their legal obligations properly, could let through a flow of illicit funds. So, politically, there is no good argument to be made that all of those participants shouldn't be regulated in the same way. But of course, there's nuance. The situations that are encountered by a payments firm are very different from those that are encountered by a trust and corporate service provider, for instance, or an accountancy firm. Well, the rules have a built-in regulator for that, which is the firm-wide risk assessment. So that describes, the business model, and it identifies entirely your exposures, and from that you derive the systems and controls that will meet your legal obligations. So for me, it's about going back to the fundamentals of the framework and making that work. and that's as capable of working in a single supervisory model as it is in a multi-supervisor model. Possibly, it's even better. On your question that enforcement might be a little bit cautious.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's interesting. A moment ago, we were talking about fines and saying that fines are not of themselves dissuasive, and I stand by that. But a fine of any kind of significance could be an existential threat for a smaller firm. And I think we have to face the fact that these gatekeeper roles are typically at a smaller level of firm. So I think supervision has to take that into account. If you want the fine to hurt only as much for a two-person law firm as a fine would hurt for a global bank, then you will have to, be careful about your expectations.
Absolutely. No, that makes sense. Yeah, thank you for that. That makes sense. That was very very detailed. A good that perhaps leads us on to talking about fraud and AML. It comes up a lot, this topic within events and when we're discussing with sort of peer-to-peer in the financial crime space, talking about fraud and AML, which are often seen as very siloed within certain organizations. So from your perspective, do you believe that split is perhaps part of the problem or the challenge, let's say?
I mean, it can be. It's not going to be, the only part. I've seen operations where fraud and money laundering are handled together by one team using common tools, and that can work really well. I've seen other ones in which there are, barriers between the two, and they work on an entirely siloed basis, and that can work well too. Even if they're using common tools and common skills, there are certain advantages in keeping them separate. And I would support the firm in addressing its risks in a way that suits it best. I'd rather it had that kind of flexibility. But ultimately, our key defense against any kind of financial crime doesn't exist in these structures. It doesn't really exist in the compliance team or the AML team or the fraud team. It exists at the customer interface. It exists where the firm is interacting with its customers, looking at what the customers are doing or asking them to do, and to say, well, with what I know about this customer and their situation, does this make sense? Is this reasonable? Or am I missing something important because I can't make this make sense? And it doesn't matter whether you're looking at fraud or sanctions evasion or money laundering or proliferation financing or anything else. If you don't have those people at the customer interface attuned just at that, high level to this seems weird, it's not going to work. And all of the, moving the furniture behind the scenes and putting, partition walls in and stuff isn't going to help.
Absolutely. It would probably be remiss of us. We haven't actually mentioned AI yet, but I'm going to.
Yeah, I think it's an obligation. I think we have to do that at some point. Yeah.
Talk about AI. Yes, it was coming, wasn't it? It was always coming. There's obviously been huge investment and huge hype and everything else around AI and indeed RegTech right now. Do you believe we're genuinely improving detection or just automating inefficiency? How about that for a contentious question?
No, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Well, I always have this mental picture of the inefficiency that's baked into our AI approach, and it works like this. A few years ago, well, a couple of decades ago, probably, firms started introducing automated transaction monitoring. So of the millions or tens of millions of transactions that go through a typical bank, a machine looks at all of them, it applies some rules and some scenarios, and it says, well, these ones can pass, that's no problem. But these ones we're going to pile up for some clever people to look at, because we can't rule out them potentially having indications of financial crime. So it would build a pile. In fact, that's not high enough. It would build a mountain of alerts, and then you would have a team that would go and pick stuff out of that mountain, look at them individually, and say either, yeah, actually, I see what you're saying, machine, but actually that's okay. We'll let that through. Or saying, I think the machine's got a point here. Let's escalate that. Let's get people to look at it. And most firms' experience was of that mountain, maybe 5% of it needed looking at, and the rest could be thrown back. So when we approached that problem and tried to solve it with AI, our first approach, and one that still defines the approach in the industry to some extent, was not to go and replace the machine that's creating the mountain. It was use the AI to replace those people who are taking stuff off the mountain. So in other words, the mountain's still there. It's still being created every day. The dumb machine is creating this mountain that another machine then has to try and tidy up afterwards. And that seems to me fundamentally inefficient. If you are going to go all in on better automation, why use it just to address a side effect rather than to re-engineer the cure?
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to be able to get that image of the mountain out of my head now.
No, I can't either. It's dreadful.
Yeah. So you've done that really well. So the next part, I just wanted to touch on regulators, UK regulators in particular.
Okay.
Do you think that they're becoming more strategic in tackling financial crime, or do you believe we're still largely enforcement-led and perhaps reactive? Do you have any thoughts on that, Ray?
Well, I mean, I think we need to have a certain amount of empathy for the regulator, because regulators can't win. When they undertake enforcement, is that a sign of regulation working or a sign of regulation not working? Because it's difficult, isn't it? If you think, well, they're finding more firms, they're finding more than ever, they're undertaking more enforcement, they're censuring more firms than they ever have. From one point of view, well, that's great, they're doing a lot. And from another point of view is, well, they're clearly not making a difference because this stuff's still going on. So I feel sorry for the regulator there. They simply can't win, really, can they? I think it comes back to your earlier question about, what are we measuring?
Yep.
So here, clearly, we're measuring regulatory activity, but unless we set that against some kind of estimate for how much harm or how much crime is going on in the background, we don't know whether that's a sign that the regulators are doing better or doing worse. And before you say, well, it's somewhere between 2 and 5% of global GDP, surely is laundered every year. I think there's a widespread school of thought that number was made up 20 years ago in a lift.
Yeah. And perhaps needs updating. Yeah.
Because it was. And I mean, there are challenges in updating that number and getting a view, because, we don't know what we don't know.
Don't know. Yeah.
So, it's no better than an estimate that I could give you, because it's based on exactly the same knowledge of what's going on, which is not very much.
Okay. So just let's finish on a final wrap-up question for you, Ray. Thank you very much for that. Looking ahead, we always like to look ahead. I was going to say 5 years ahead. That seems like a long time ahead. But what area or areas, perhaps, of financial crime risk do you think that the industry is underestimating today, perhaps? So perhaps an uncomfortable prediction, or predictions. What are your thoughts there?
Okay. Well, I mean, yeah, no, it's a fascinating question, and often we spend so much time looking at current threats that we're not looking at future threats. In fact, I'd go further. We're actually looking at, old threats rather than necessarily current threats. I'll give you another image as well, which is the long queues of people at airport security still taking their shoes off. And they're taking their shoes off because of one single event in 2001, to which that was a knee-jerk control measure. Let's get your shoes off and let's put them through the scanner and let's make sure you've not got a shoe bomb. I don't think anyone has attempted to bomb a plane using a shoe-based device since 2001. So, for 25 years, millions of us have been taking our shoes off at the airport. Now, that's okay, potentially. That's a way of making sure that nobody does actually try to do it, and I completely buy into that. But how much security are we deriving from having to take our shoes off and everyone having to take their shoes off? Because if we think, oh, that's great, we've shut that threat down, we're fooling ourselves. We have shut down one minor typology that was tried once and hasn't been tried since. Well, if the threat comes back next week, it's not going to be in the form of shoe bombs. And unfortunately, us believing that we've covered it by getting people to take their shoes off is misguided, and it's dangerous, because it means we're not looking for what happens next. We need to have the imagination that the criminals can quite freely exercise. And I don't think we have it. And coming back to your point about, regulators perhaps being a little bit responsive or reactive, and reacting to what's happened. I think as an industry, the industry, as an industry, on a wide scale, and that's all of us, we need to look ahead a little bit more and be creative and think, well, if it were me, if I were going to try and do it, no one's better positioned to be a financial criminal than someone who works in anti-financial crime. So, use that and say, well, look, I'm not going to, but if I were going to do it, how would I do it? And is that covered?
Yep.
And how do I guard against that?
Yep. Absolutely.
So what will it look like in 5 years? I don't know. I have these nightmares where, our agentic AIs and the criminals' agentic AIs are off fighting a proxy war, and we're all kind of sitting in a bunker. And to undertake any financial transaction, takes a week. I mean, it could go like that, because that's what happens in arms races often. But I mean, I hope not. But it does rely on us being less invested in what's happened in the past and much more invested in what might happen in the future.
Forward thinking, absolutely. Yeah, that's good advice. Funny enough, I was at Dublin Airport at the weekend. I go over there quite a lot now, because one of my daughters plays hockey for Ireland, and apparently the shoes you have to take off are Converse and Uggs. So yeah,
Really?
they were not all shoes, but yeah. So, but anyway,
I've been taking off those Hokers as well. They've got massive soles, haven't they?
yes, exactly. Yes. But maybe just to actually have one last question to finish it on a positive, because we talk about younger generation of fin crime professionals.
Yes.
What advice and tips would you give them, perhaps, like people who are looking or entering into the world of financial crime as professionals? Any tips or hints based on your experience?
Oh, well, an anti-financial crime professional can land in the first line typically, or the second line, or sometimes the third line. But I think what I would say is know where you sit, or take care to find out where you sit in the overall framework, and think about the people that you're interfacing with, and what are their needs, what are their pain points, and how are you positioned to make that more effective, and to to work at the interfaces to make things efficient, because financial crime happens at speed and with skill, and therefore if anti-financial crime can't happen at speed and with skill, then we're going to lose. Financial crime is often concentrated in a small number of hands, whereas anti-financial crime is in a large number of hands. It has many more handovers than the criminal flows have. So those handovers all have to be very efficient. and very swift. So if I were a young person looking to make a mark, I would say, how can I get this team working more like a team? How can I do my bit to make that more seamless?
Brilliant. Thank you. That's great advice. Thank you. Yeah, because we're always here to support the young professionals as well coming into the industry. So, but thank you for that. Thank you for that, Ray. That was really brilliant. So big thank you to Ray Blake for joining us today, subject matter expert at Risk Alert 247 and director of the Dark Money Files. So it's been an absolute pleasure, Ray. So thank you very much for your time today.
I've enjoyed it greatly. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you.